Good day to everyone, wherever you are. Good morning or good afternoon or good evening. This will be the 2021 Asia Pacific Virtual EE Forum with a tagline, The Power of Connections Advancing EE in the Region. And this session is a concurrent session on day one, round two. We just concluded round one with a theme, Biodiversity Education, the secret sauce of conservation success. We have two distinguished speakers, Alison Bowers, a research associate from Social Ecology Lab, Stanford University, and Jo Leen Yap, a wildlife researcher and nature educator from Lango Project Penang. So before I pass the screen to both of them to present, let me give a brief overview of what's happening for environmental education at the global level. Over the years, environmental education, for some, it is known as education for sustainable development, has been recognized as one of the powerful tools to advance conservation, which is so important to save our planet. As EE requires not only improved awareness, relevant knowledge, critical skills, and the right attitude, cumulatively, it enhances behavioral changes with an action-oriented contributions from an individual to the larger society of the planet. This has been recognized and reinforced in the recently concluded UN Climate Change Conference, or COP26, held in November 2021, which recognized climate education as an integral part of the solution. Likewise, UNESCO has also launched ESD framework for 2030 in 2021 to support the realizations of the UN SDGs. The UN's Conventions on Biological Diversity, or COP50, which will be held in two phases in October 2021 and April 2022, emphasizes on the conservations on biological diversity as one of its main objectives. So today's topic will be most appropriate in reference to the COP15 and also ESD framework for 2030. So, as I said earlier, we have two distinguished speakers from Malaysia and the USA to share their views and experiences with us. Firstly, let me introduce the first speaker. Jo Leen Yap, head of Lango Project Penang, Malaysia, is also a PhD candidate, a wildlife researcher, and environmental educator, studying the ecology and behavior of dusty langurs in Penang, Malaysia. She is the founder and the head of Lango Project Penang, a community science project on primate research and conservation in Penang. Her topic will be a story of dusky langur, how EE plays a role in wildlife conservation. Over to you, Jo Leen. Take it away.
All right, good day to everyone. Thank you so much to Thiaga as well as the conference organizer for having me from Malaysia to share with all of you regarding a story of dusky langurs. So just plus some brief information regarding myself. So I'm an environmental education and wildlife researcher. So for this short 15 minutes presentation, I'm going to share with you guys how we integrate environmental education with wildlife conservation in order to conserve this unique species of primates that we can find in Malaysia as well as certain parts of Thailand and Myanmar. All right, so let's get it started. Okay, so I'm from the organization Lango Project Penang. It's a community science project under the umbrella of Malaysian Primatological Society, a registered NGO in Malaysia. So some background information regarding this primate species to every one of you who have not seen this before, or maybe you've seen this on the TV programs or even on Google. So they are the dusky langurs, a species of leaf monkeys that you can find in Southeast Asia, and they are currently endangered species under the IUCN Red List. So in our studies, our project, Lango Project Penang, we study the ecology and behavior of this species of primate, the dusky langurs, and we utilize the data that we collected from the field and then use it for environmental education as well as a conservation planning for the survival of the species, which I'm gonna elaborate more about it later on. So just a very overall view of this graphic for everyone regarding human-monkey interface. So basically, human-monkey interface is similar to human-monkey or even human-wildlife conflict or interaction in general. So this graphic they created by my team member illustrated the flow of deforestation, fragmentation towards urbanization, as well as exposing various wildlife species around our neighborhood or even in our natural habitat towards threats such as poaching, roadkills, and pet trades. So next on, I'm going to elaborate the three main threats towards the survival of dusky langurs as case study to everyone who can relate, and then how we utilize environmental education into our citizen science project as well as conservation planning as well. All right, okay, let's look at habitat fragmentation. So habitat fragmentation means the habitat is being divided into small patches. So wildlife species such as dusky langurs, they will have challenges or even problems in getting from one patch of the fragmented habitat to the other side of the habitat. So for dusky langurs, since we started our observation on this species since 2016, around 6 years ago, we realized that the dusky langurs, they are coping with various types of different anthropogenic environment, not only in a human impacted areas such as gardens or even neighborhoods, but also around the road setting areas as well. Like as you can see on the top left over here, the dusky langurs, they are leaping from tree to tree, which is the natural behavior of a treetop animal, arboreal species. But then due to human impacted factors and reasons such as the opening of roads or even infrastructure or even buildings urbanization, wildlife species like dusky langurs, they are coping through cable wire walking or even running through the roads, which may cause roadkill. All right, since the dusky langurs, they are getting closer to us around our human environmental setting because their natural habitats are being fragmented and even habitat loss is a huge problem. So it's not uncommon to see them around our neighborhood. Yeah, same goes to some of the urban wildlife around you that you can relate as well. And this causes humans trying to feed them, and this leads to a negative human-monkey interaction, which is the second threat towards the survival of the dusky langur as well as multiple wildlife species around our neighborhood. So for Langur Project Penang, my group, we actually came out with a different infographic to approach schools, institutions, as well as community neighborhood members, and trying to educate them through storytelling, as well as easy to digest infographic regarding the importance of no feeding monkeys, as well as proper waste management, etc., in order to prevent disease transmission between human and monkeys, as well as trying to reduce the conflict cases between humans and urban monkeys as well. So if you're interested in looking at this infographic in a more comprehensive flow, feel free to go to our website, which is langurprojectpenang.com, and feel free to download all the materials that we have on our website. All right, so here comes the third threat towards the dusky langurs, which are the babies. The orange babies are very striking and very adorable, and this also kind of like make them one of the major target of illegal wildlife pet trade. So poachers would capture the babies from the natural habitats or even by the road setting and then sell them on social media or even in the dark market as well. So illegal wildlife pet trade is a global issue that faced by different conservationists trying to conserve the targeted species of their own. So it's something that we can do individually, which we Langur Project Penang are trying to actively educate the community members about this. All right, so we create cartoons or even like comics for children to understand the importance of letting wild be wild in their natural habitats instead of habituating them through the wrong way, such as the comparison between these two graphics over here. Okay, so now here comes the problem. How to coexist with monkey through environmental education? What can we do as a researcher? I'm a researcher, I'm a PhD student, so what I can do to help bridge the gap between environmental education and scientific research. And I really love environmental education, which later Alison gonna explain more regarding the importance of scientific communities and merging environmental education together, which we're trying to educate the people around us and let them understand the importance of certain issue, and hopefully they'll, transform their interest or even their participation into action, which we're able to do more than just a research itself, but to actually create an impact from individuals or even community levels. All right, so in Langer Project Penang, we created multiple citizen-science projects, which I'm going to show it to you guys later, in engaging citizens of different ages, to conserve dusky langurs. First of all, is start from the research project, because in our study, we collect data on the ecology and behavior, basically the activities, as well as the social behavior and the home range sizes of the dusky langurs in multiple forested area in Penang and different parts of Malaysia. So we train community members, volunteers, regarding the methodology, the protocol of studying behavior of wildlife in the wild. So through the process of educating them and training them, they'll learn about using the binoculars or even identify some crucial plants that we can find around our neighborhood and the forest area, which are important for wildlife species. And most important is to learn about other species of wildlife as well. Like here you can see these two different species of monkeys, they're grooming each other, which leads to understanding the importance of coexistence. Okay, so from the data that we collected from the field, we also collected a whole bunch of data regarding the road crossing behavior of the dusky langurs by the road. So from here, we collaborate with stakeholders from government bodies to different NGOs and also different individuals like engineers and even arborists as well to build canopy bridge to help dusky langurs and other treetop animals to cross the road safely. All right, so this is a photo of a roadkill of a dusky langur that we took last year. And we decided to try to mitigate the impact of habitat fragmentation by introducing this low-cost and easy method, and it is not permanent, that enable to help animals to cross the road safely. And since 2019, we have collected more than 3,000 footages of animal crossing, which comprises of around 8 to 10 species of treetop animals as well. Okay, so from the data that we collected from the Canopy Bridge project, as well as the citizen science project in the forest, which we train the volunteers to collect data, and we're able to utilize all this knowledge and information and transform it into different ways for people to understand regarding the beauty of rainforests, as well as important for us to participate in the wildlife conservation. So we conduct roadshows and we create creative contents like you see the infographic just now, and we also bring kids and adults into the rainforest like multiple times per month and talk to them about the importance of the plants around us in our natural habitat through the perspective of a dusky langur. All right, so why environmental education in nature? So I'm sure that pandemic has taken a toll on us. All of us are like trying to find the roots towards nature, trying to appreciate nature even more. And certain parents can be like very protective and having the fear towards exposing their kids to nature. So we really hope that through this step-by-step approach, like from a very, very like a low nature setting area to high nature setting area, able to unlock the potential among kids for them to participate in various environmental education activities happening in outdoor setting. And these are some of the examples that we have in our program, from integrating arts as well as collecting dry specimens of the plant parts to utilizing upcycles materials in creating wildlife conservation relating craft. Yeah, it's not just a one-term thing. It's something that they can bring back and put it in their house and able to appreciate it for as long as they want. And most important is for them to digest the information regarding wildlife conservation through a relatable way. All right, and since the pandemic started, since COVID, we approached the community members through online social media, through different platforms like WeChat, Facebook, Instagram, and WhatsApp to collect all the information regarding the dusky langur sighting, as many as possible as we can. And so far, we have collected more than 400 different urban sighting coordinates, regarding the sighting of dusky langurs, and we're able to like analyze it, and we're still accumulating more data. Hopefully, all this data help us to identify the potential canopy bridge installation coordinates, as well as the targeted focus location that we're able to transform it into our next study sites as well as community project as well. And we're still never give up since the pandemic and trying to spread the awareness as wide as possible. It is very hard during the pandemic as we can't go out, but we do what we can as an environmental educator. And I'm sure that everyone here are doing your best as well. Yeah, and now hopefully the situation will get better. And I'm really looking forward to go back to the field and to, put the mask on and do as many environmental education from the perspective of a wildlife researcher as much as I can. All right, yeah. And so this is a slide that regarding some of the wildlife reporting offenses, a tutorial that we actually educate the public members when they see people feeding monkeys or even find social media posting on wildlife trade. So everyone can make a difference even through social media in your phone. All right, so we really hope to embrace the mission statement of Langer Project Penang, which is to promote coexistence between humans and wildlife. And I feel that this is really important as habitat is transforming by humans year by year. It's really important for us to coexist instead of finding the ideal solution to solve the problem, because there's no ideal solution. There's only empathy, toleration, understanding, so that all of us can coexist together. All right, so this is the end of my sharing, and thank you so much to everyone. Feel free to head to our website and social media pages for more information and more interactive videos and graphics. Thank you so much. Pass to you, Thiaga.
Yeah. Thanks, Jo Leen. What a term that what an appropriate term that you use, coexist, because the world is shared by a lot of species, not only human being. So we need to look into how that we can coexist with so many other species. And Jo Leen has introduced citizen science program, and more, this term is being embraced by a lot of researchers, scientists, and community leaders. So look out for community science program nearer to your place and try to reach out to them so that you can be part of the conservation effort that's been happening there. So don't think that you can't play a role. You can play many roles. So citizen science program can actually give you that structure for you to play. So I also want to share with you that the structure for today will be the two presenters will present for 15 minutes each. Thanks, Jo Leen, for the time frame, for abiding to the time frame. But after that, I'll be asking few questions to the presenters. And finally, I'll be opening up these sessions for you to ask questions through the chat. So as what Christy has mentioned in the chat, thanks, Christy, that you can actually post your question in the chat. So then I will pick up and I will ask to the speakers. So it'll be good if you can actually mention to which speaker that you are posting these questions. But apart from that, you also can provide your feedback or some of the experience that you think that is relevant and useful for other audience or the participants to also get to know about it. Okay, so without much ado, let me introduce another speaker. As I said that, Alison Bowers is a researcher in the Social Ecology Lab at the Stanford University, USA. Research interests includes collective environmental literacy, design thinking, and research review. Her topic will be research on environmental educations and conservation. For those who are actively involved in research, as well as who wants to know more about research, this presentation will be useful for you. I really felt excited with the presentation earlier on because she has a lot of rich content to share with you all. So over to you, Alison.
Thank you, Thiaga, and thank you to the NAAW staff for the invitation and the organizers of the 2021 Asia Pacific EE Forum for this opportunity to share the work from our lab with this audience. And thank you to Jo Leen for being part of the panel and sharing her wonderful work, because it blends so nicely and exemplifies so nicely so many of the things I'm going to talk about. It's great to see it in practice. So thank you, Jo Leen and Thiaga. It's an honor to speak with you all today with this international audience. And as Thiaga mentioned, my topic is on research on environmental education and conservation. As mentioned, I'm a researcher in Professor Nicole Ardren's Social Ecology Lab at Stanford University in California, USA. I've worked previously as an environmental educator and special education teacher before transitioning to a focus on academic research. I am especially a methodologist. I got my PhD in educational research and evaluation with a focus on research review methods. So for my Sorry about that. For the brief talk today, I am going to talk a little bit about what our lab does, and then talk specifically about one of the projects we're involved in called EE Works, along with NAAEE and a variety of other partners. As part of the EE Works, we conducted a systematic review of conservation outcomes in environmental education, and I'll be sharing how we conducted that review and some of our findings. And then finally, I'll give a quick snapshot of recent biodiversity education research. So to talk about our lab a little bit, for over a decade, we've been exploring the connections between environmental literacy and sustainability action as influenced by connections to place in both ordinary settings like the home, the classroom, or museums, and extraordinary settings like the Galapagos Islands or the majestic redwoods in California. So we explore environmental literacy and define it broadly to include not only knowledge, attitudes, and skills, but other resources such as social networks and financial capital, other resources that can support action. And so we're interested in how sense of place connects with this and at all the different scales, from the collective to the individual, from the global to the local, and everywhere in between. One of the projects that we work on is called EE Works, and the lead partner is NAAEE, the North American Association for Environmental Education, and they work with us and a variety of other partners to examine and coalesce the research that speaks to the impact and value of environmental education. Guided by an expert advisory board, NAAEE, as the lead partner, works with university-based scholars to plan, conduct, and disseminate systematic reviews of research. We have so far completed a number of reviews that have focused on K through 12 youth environmental education, conservation outcomes and education, climate change education, and early childhood environmental education. We currently have 3 reviews still in process, and those are focused on citizen science, civic engagement, and positive youth development. So in our lab, we define a systematic review as a documented, structured review of research that uses a set of prescribed research methods. And so there's all different types of research reviews you can do. So why does EE Works focus on systematic reviews? Part of it is systematic reviews are an ideal tool to handle the growth and scholarly research that's occurred in fields such as environmental education. Systematic reviews are also introduce less bias than perhaps a traditional narrative review. And when conducting a research review of any size, there really are a lot of decisions you have to make about what to include, what to exclude, what to focus on, and a systematic review can help simplify that decision-making process. And finally, since systematic reviews are well known in many fields, there's a common language that facilitates the sharing of the review process and outcomes. Systematic reviews can be conducted in many different ways, but in general, there are 7 to 8 steps. For this quick presentation, I've simplified those into 4 very broad steps. The first one is you search the literature to try to look for research studies that can answer your research questions. The second one is to screen those search results. So you get a bunch of results, and then it's time to search through those and figure out which ones are truly relevant to your research question. From those selected studies, you extract the data of interest, and then you analyze that data. So as I said, there's a lot more to doing a systematic review, and if you're interested in any of that, be sure to check out the methods sections of our review papers, or NAAEE provides a great document on their website that kind of details the whole systematic review process we've used in the EE Works project. So be sure to check that out. For this presentation, I'm focusing on one of the reviews that looked at conservation outcomes. So initially, we were interested in education programs that measured and reported on ecological indicators such as air quality, and water quality, and species diversity. And we were hoping to find programs that linked education to changes in these outcomes. But our preliminary searches suggested there weren't a lot of those studies, so we decided to look more broadly, and that led to our research questions of, in what ways are researchers measuring conservation and environmental quality outcomes of environmental education? And then follow it up with what trends occur in studies that report directly observed outcomes of environmental behaviors and action. So with those questions in mind, we launched our search for relevant studies. We searched 7 academic databases and included only peer-reviewed literature published in English in 1996 to 2016. So we wanted to find a research that was relevant to the questions we were asking, and we used 2 sets of search terms. The first set of terms are environmental education focused and included terms like, obviously, environmental education, but also synonymous terms such as conservation education, education for sustainability, sustainability education, etc. So once we had kind of narrowed our search to environmental education literature, we were interested in identifying research that focused on conservation outcomes. And for that, we used search terms using the Planetary Boundaries Framework by Rockstrom. And that involved using search terms such as climate change, biodiversity, water quality, and pollution. So we put those search terms into our databases and came up with over 2,000 studies to review. So the next step is to screen those results. So we start with over 2,000 abstracts, and then team members begin to screen those studies using a decision tree. And a decision tree is just a list of questions that you ask yourself as you read the abstract and title. The first 2 questions were appropriate in the first round of review. And they asked, was an environmental education intervention assessed? And if yes, we then asked a second question, were conservation and environmental outcomes measured and reported? And again, if the question was yes, that abstract then made it into the next round for full text review. So of those 2,239 abstracts we reviewed, 286 were targeted for full text review based on those decision tree. We then read the full text of those articles using that same decision tree and added a quality check saying, do the methods of this study, are they appropriate? Are they reported on? Is information provided? And is there supporting data for any conclusions drawn? So in our systematic review, we just had this very basic quality check. And now based on that decision tree, we went from 286 full studies to a sample of 105 studies that we believe to be relevant to our research question. So the next step is we had the 105 studies, we read through all those and coded them. And in this case, we were really interested in the reported outcomes. And so you can see our findings here suggested that behavioral antecedents were the most frequently reported outcome category. Behavioral antecedents include things like changes in environmental knowledge, skills, attitudes, any of these kind of antecedents that might lead to behavior change. The next most reported outcome was completed actions. This is things like people planting trees or picking up litter. We also saw capacity building outcomes when people talked about partnerships being formed in communities or new environmental groups established. Next, we had 2 types of behaviors, one being self-reported behaviors. So this is when people reported on their own behavior change. We also saw some cases of observed behaviors, and this is when the researchers actually observed behavior change through energy use changes or amount of recycling or amount of litter picked up, or things like that can be physically observed. And finally, we had a few studies that reported on ecological indicators, such as a change in water quality or air quality or species diversity. So basically what this first level of analysis told us was there are lots of ways to report outcomes related to conservation. we were most interested in what we call the direct outcomes. These are the ones most directly related to these ecological indicators and included things like the ecological indicators, as well as completed actions and observed behaviors. And as you'll see in the top of the blue pyramid there, they form what we call our direct subsample. So there were 56 studies that reported one or more of those three outcomes. And it's this subsample that we did a deep dive of analysis to look into what's going on in this sample. What are people doing to create and to lead to these types of outcomes? And so the thematic findings we found from reviewing these 56 studies were that you really need to prioritize measuring and reporting direct outcomes. And how do you do this? This is facilitated by choosing topics with a local focus. And so you notice a lot of these things I talk about here, you heard Jo Leen talk about in her presentation. So it's really nice to see the research findings in action on the ground. So choosing topics with a local focus, forming partnerships with scientists, natural resource managers, and local organizations, incorporating action projects, and finally being intentional, creative, and thorough in measuring and reporting program outcomes. So again, these 4 strategies can really help if you are interested in developing a program that will be measuring and reporting direct conservation outcomes. So the number 1 topic of our subsample actually was biodiversity, but there were other topics as well, such as pollution and education programs about water quality. So our review wasn't necessarily focused solely on biodiversity education. So I wanted to quickly share a review that was focused on biodiversity education, and that's a 2012 review paper by Navarro, Perez, and Tidball, who reviewed research on biodiversity education and reported 4 challenges. 1, a need for a defined approach to biodiversity education. 2, a need to clarify the concept of biodiversity itself. And then they really saw a need for improved communication with the general public about biodiversity issues. So often when you're hearing about environmental issues today, it's often about climate change. Sometimes it can be about water quality, but biodiversity doesn't always get a lot of attention. And so they really saw a need to talk more about and raise the awareness about biodiversity issues. And then finally, an improved connection between people and nature. Also something you saw Jo Leen mention in her presentation, that this really is a need to connect people with nature, to get them to care more about biodiversity and understand it. So I encourage you to seek out this study too, to learn more about their findings. And so the problem with research reviews is that they quickly go out of date. And so even though we did ours and published it in 2018, it had taken us about 2 years to complete the research review. And the other one was from 2012 that I mentioned. So I wanted to just give a quick snapshot on some recent research on biodiversity education. So I dove into some of that on Google Scholar, see what are folks talking about in biodiversity education research right now. And shouldn't come as a surprise that a lot of what they're talking about, we heard Jo Leen mention, because where do researchers get their ideas from? Practitioners a lot. So it was nice to hear her talk about a lot of these themes. One of these is the promise of citizen science. So there's a lot of research to back up what Jo Leen's doing, that citizen science really is a great tool for biodiversity education. Also, you heard Jo Leen mention the use of technology in some of her programs, and that's another theme we see in the research. The study I cite here, the Gass et al. Used iNaturalist, so the app you can get on your iPhone or Android, and use that, and they were using them in bioblitzes, which is just a fancy word for biomonitoring, biodiversity monitoring. And then finally, a theme on working with specific audiences and context. So as human populations become more urbanized, discussions of biodiversity in urban areas are becoming more and more important. So we see a little bit of a trend in the biodiversity education research about working in urban areas. And Jo Leen mentioned some of the challenges of biodiversity in urban areas. And then finally, a theme of working with Indigenous people. The study I cite here, the Schuster et al., looks at how Indigenous managed land is often very successful at managing high rates of biodiversity. And so there seems to really be a natural fit between working with Indigenous folks and biodiversity education. This is kind of just a quick summary of all the research out there on biodiversity education. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. My email's there. We certainly invite you to visit our lab website, as well as please visit the NAAE website, which focuses on the EE Works project, has links to all of our research reviews there, as well as lots of resources to help you interpret those reviews and share the findings with practitioners and funders. So thank you all very much for your time and attention, and quick look at the references, and then contact me if you have any questions. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Alison. Another brilliant presentation. I could see that there's one question in the chat by Wendell, but keep it coming. Yeah, I like the way that Alison connect environmental literacy and also sustainability action, and particularly the last one of the few last slides where she was talking about 4 challenges for biodiversity education. One of the challenges is improved connection between people and climate. So this is what we're talking about. Some of the anthropogenic issues that we're talking about is created by people without really realizing that it's actually influencing negatively the other species as well as people at the end of the day. And we could see a lot of issues now coming back to us. So that's why in WWF, working on, we actually have introduced New Deal for Nature and People. We need to know what is the function of nature and how that we can actually reciprocate so that we can live in harmony, like what Jo Leen was saying earlier, that we need to coexist with a lot of being, whether it's flora and fauna, so that we can actually live in harmony in nature. Okay, so we are coming to the second part, which is Q&A. I'm going to pose a few questions to our 2 presenters. The first question I'm going to direct to Jo Leen. Jo Leen, you mentioned a lot about citizen science approach, and I feel that citizen science approach is one of the effective tools that more and more traction is gained, especially through the researchers, because rather than dry conservation work or research work, they want to get involved people to be part of the initiative. But I'm sure that there's a lot of rewards or support or encouragement needed. So how do you encourage the community or group of people to actually report on these urban sightings using the citizen science approach?
All right, thank you for the question, Thiaga. Yeah, I guess networking and collaboration with different organizations and stakeholders is equally important. Like Alison touched on iNaturalist and also BioBlitz as well. Like every time when you have a BioBlitz happening, there will be collaboration of a multiple research group as well as institution and also academician, yeah, researchers, and even community science project as well. So collaboration is the key. Like for our part, when we started to launch the full online urban setting sighting citizen science project, yeah, it's due to the accumulative networking that we have in different parts of the community in Malaysia that we encourage them to report sightings to us. But of course, here comes another challenge: is why would they need to report sightings to us? Like we don't have an app design like iNaturalist. It's like very rewarding every time you identify the correct species. You feel like very accomplished, very rewarding. But for us, we're trying to provide them like a one time. Like what we always do is if there's any particular context or even emails or even the messengers from certain community members, like having a nuisance issue with the monkeys in their orchards or even around the neighborhood area, we'll approach them, go to their place, or even during the pandemic, we chat with them over the phone. And this kind of like trigger their interest to be a part of a mission, like trying to transform my farm into a human wildlife friendly farm, or even do my part to help Langer Project Penang in conserving the dusky langur, is to create a purpose and create a mission for the people regardless of their ages, and how do they utilize their skill, like engineering skill or even graphic design skill, to contribute towards urban citizen science data. I guess it's really important to have empathy and treat every individual as an individual and speak to them regarding what are their thoughts before we go towards like trying to just use them as a like citizen scientist to collect data. Yeah, human approach is equally important. Yeah, hope this explains.
Yeah. Thanks. So it's like bringing everyone together into the equation so that conservation impact or conservation outcome will be realized sooner or will be greater at scale.
Yeah.
Another question is, wildlife conservation is always seen as targeting the wildlife that is of our concern, whether it's being bred, whether it is actually being endangered and things like that. So rather than in situ direct conservation through wildlife conservation, why we need to integrate environmental education? Very often, integrating environmental education may be seen as wasting or not using the resources optimally. So that's one part. Second part is there is also challenges in getting environmental education integrated in wildlife conservation. So maybe that you can talk a bit on that in terms of why we need that, as well as what are the challenges you face in terms of integrating EE in wildlife conservation?
All right, to me, thanks for the very, very good question, Thiaga. To me, environmental education is like a bridge. Yeah, like I mentioned in my sharing before, a bridge between science, like all the scientific data that community members wouldn't understand, and with the community grassroots efforts. Yeah, so like among my colleagues, environmental education for research is still very, very new in our scene, especially in primate research in Malaysia. Yeah, but we try to integrate it as many as possible, starting with collaborating with schools, like the different stakeholders, etc. Come up with very simple activities like games, campaigns, and even roadshows. All this could serve as a minor or even big impact for the community members as well. So like Thiaga, you mentioned, of course, there are challenges in figuring out how to monitoring the success of the environmental education, as well as the different syllabus or even the different activities that we can create a long-term impact. Yeah, for now, we are looking forward to collaborating with different social scientists in Malaysia in measuring the success of environmental education in our program, which we have yet done this yet, which we are really very looking forward to do it next year. But most important is to collaborate, to network, and trying to embrace environmental education, not only in conservation, but also in many issues around us as well. Like Thiaga, you mentioned on the concern species, but environmental education can help to highlight other species or even other flora and fauna through our ambassador species, like the concern species. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks, Jo Leen. I hope that Jo Leen's explanation is very clear. But if you have any further questions on that or feedback, please use the chat function to utilize it. Back to you, Alison. You talk passionately about conservation and biodiversity education. I'm sure that something else excites you rather than deep dive into the conservation and biodiversity education at some point of time in your life. Maybe you want to share what excites you to work on conservation and biodiversity education.
Yes, thanks, Thiaga. That's a great question. And I I know we've talked earlier about sometimes there's a lot of anxiety, and it's very easy to get almost depressed about some of the climate change issues that we're seeing, and during the pandemic especially. And so I think what's exciting now is I've been working in the field for many years, and when I first started, there was a big focus on individual work, getting individuals to change their individual behavior, getting folks to turn off lights or to recycle. And now we're seeing much more, at least in the research now, realizing the importance of the collective. And so it's really nice to see researchers looking at how do you get people to come together. And so certainly there still needs to be that initial transaction of knowledge, informing folks about issues and raising awareness and that sort of thing. But really figuring out how do you then get them to come together and to solve and tackle a problem at the collective level. So we draw on a lot of research from Ostrom and sociology and economics about collective action and figuring out how we can apply that in practice. And we see that on the ground in Jo Leen's work, right? How you get families to come together and how you get communities, because these are collective issues. So I think that's the thing that excites me most now is just the collective nature. And then certainly, as Jo Leen mentioned, connecting, scientists with the everyday public. That's where the magic happens.
Yeah, I remember one of the key to happiness produced by National Geographic. It says that one of the key to happiness is how we are connected with each other, how we appreciate, how we are being valued. So this is actually part of how that we can actually make ourselves available to be happy as we grow together. Yeah, but I have one more question for you, but I'll save that for later. Because I have Wendell, where that he asks a very important question. I find that this is something that we collectively need to think about, and as conservationists, you guys have thought about it, and this is actually meant for Jo Leen. What are your visions about the projects you discussed a while ago in the next 5 to 10 years? Is there any chance that we can save the dusky langur from extinction? Now itself is already in the IUCN red list, right?
Yeah, there's definitely hope, and it's never too late to start. Because, like for us, we are just a very small group, like working most of the time on the ground and still lack of manpower. So for the next 5 to 10 years, I would elaborate my vision about the project into 3 main parts. First, research is to collaborate with more young scientists on investigating different roles of the dusky langurs. Because so far, we only have the baseline data on the road ecology and the overall activities and the home ranges of the dusky langurs, but we have yet discovered the role of the seed dispersing agent part of the dusky langurs, and also different research project that we would like to pursue. And second part is on the canopy bridge. Yeah, my vision for the next 5 to 10 years is to get more stakeholders, especially developers, as well as governmental sectors to really take canopy bridge as a easy, low cost and simple methodology to implement it in any parts of wildlife corridor hotspots in Malaysia, which we are still working hard in doing this because of manpower, funding and permit as well. And third, environmental education, of course, to me is the most important, because we can't just doing our research and not letting the people know what's around us. Like dusky langur is just one of the many species that you can find in our hometown. So environmental education part, we would like to work with many different scientists like Alison and also our local scientists in Malaysia, and trying to show that environmental education really has an impact through measuring the long-term success. So that more researchers, more institutions would kind of like, trying to utilize environmental education more towards achieving conservation efforts. So definitely there's a hope, and I would foresee dusky langur will never go extinct. Thank you.
So the advocacy implementation that involves private sector, public sector, academia, and also community is very important. That will give us more complete ecosystems to work and to save all these animals. Okay, there we have another question from Jo Leen Yap. She sort of like combined her questions to be addressed by both of you. She said citizen science seems to be an important source to contribute natural study data. How do you make it human oriented but still keep it science oriented and a systemic way? Either one of you can choose who want to go first, Jo Leen or Alison.
All right, yeah, maybe I can go first before pass it to Alison. So, yeah, this was asked during the previous session as well. So training is very, very important. So you can't just put it out, okay, we need data on this species or that species, and people were just sending you multiples, photo, etc. So technology like iNaturalist, or even utilizing a very simple Google form or even Excel sheet with particular questions would be very, very helpful. But make sure the questions that you design are science orientated. And for us, we work with a social scientist in our university to come up with specific questions. So training is very important. So spend some effort and spend some time in communicating with the peoples on the ground, the citizen scientists, in order to make it a more systematic way. Yeah, Alison can elaborate more.
That is a great answer, Jo Leen. And I think you talked earlier too about the importance of empathy when working, with the volunteers and during the training. And Thiaga too mentioned this idea of connection, right? And so I think it's important that even though you're talking about science, which seems very hard and fact-based, but it's important to bring in the personal connection and connecting with people, and talking about things like empathy, and then talking about things like hope and awe and that sort of thing. And so I'm sure it's tough at being on the ground to do both the solid training as well as keeping people interested. But there is, I think Jo Leen mentioned in the last session, there's lots of research on this, right? That the data can still, even from citizen scientists, can be very useful. And if the training is done at high quality, and yeah, just keeping in mind that we're all humans here, and connecting and empathizing is important.
Yeah, thank you very much for both of you. I hope that answers. Wendell has a feedback. He appreciates your answers. Hoping to see Dusky Lango in person very soon. I think that VTL vaccinated travel lane has been open with few countries. So feel free to visit Malaysia when you think that it's comfortable and safe for you to come, or whichever country that you think that the Dusky Langurs is there. And I would like to encourage further, because we have about 8 minutes more for your questions to come in or feedback to come in. Yeah, so feel free to ask more questions. But if while waiting for that, I want to ask another question to Alison. Alison, can you share some example from your review that showcases the connection between environmental education and biodiversity?
That's a great question, Thiaga. When you go through these research review, there's always a couple of studies that kind of stick out in your mind. And so I was going back through and reviewing it, and one of them that popped up was a study by Gladstone et al. From 2006. It was in the Australian Journal of Environmental Education, and it looked at a university course with first-year university students in Australia. And they were training to be natural resource managers, and the course partnered them with a natural reserve. So they made a connection with a natural reserve near the university. And they went in, and the issue there was biodiversity because of an invasive weed. And so there was some basic learning and science about the weeds and everything like that. And then these students became very involved and said, how can we help? And so they ended up going in there and doing a lot of the kind of hard back-breaking work of removing the weeds and trying to encourage doing some native plantings. And then the researchers did a great job of measuring outcomes at different levels. And so they first measured, a gain in knowledge. So there was environmental and science knowledge gained, but then also their interest level and the partnerships formed with the local nature reserve and the park staff. And then they did a good job of measuring, not right when the program ended, but also doing the follow-up after. And that's hard to do. It's resource intensive to measure those kind of outcomes. But it was really interesting to see the high levels of interest, and that even after the project ended, the students were interested and maintained their working relationship with the nature reserve. So we always thought that was a really great study of looking at how this environmental education program at that level, at the university level, did a really good job of connecting students who may not always connect with the community. It managed to do so and inspire action in them to address a biodiversity issue. So that's one example.
Right. So, I mean, it's a great explanation to the questions, I suppose. But I think since there's no question yet, maybe I want to continue with another question. What advice do you have for educators? I assume some of you are educators here, or some of you aspire to be the educators, or some of you are interacting with educators. So this answer will be important for you. Um, uh, who are looking to make the case for EE as a way to improve conservation or biodiversity protection efforts.
Is that for me, Thiaga?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. So yeah, that's really one of the founding goals of the EE Works project, was to come up with an evidence-based reviews, right? That made the case for practitioners to go to funders and to go to people and say, hey, listen, EE really can work. And so we wanted to see what researchers, were they measuring it in a way that can make that case? And so in this review, in the conservation outcomes one, as well as many of the other ones under the EE Works, we did find evidence that we hope is really useful to practitioners who want to say, hey, can you help me support my environmental education outreach? And this is why you should, because it can change knowledge, it can change attitudes, it can increase skill, but it does a bunch of other things as well. It can build community capacity. And then there's also a handful of these really solid studies that are looking at direct conservation outpacts, right? That are seeing that environmental education, often when part of a suite of strategies to address a biodiversity issue, really can make a difference. You can see some increase in species diversity and in number of species of concern, increasing their numbers. So that's really hoping what these materials, what these reviews are doing. And NAAE, if you go to their websites, does great PR work to put it in kind of everyday language that you can share with funders and say, hey, the research, this is evidence-based policy. There's research behind this that says when done correctly, when done well, environmental education can, in fact, really make a difference.
Yeah, thank you very much. So we have another 3 minutes. Before I ask each of the speakers if they want to summarize any of their presentations or their observation, I also want to congratulate everyone because the recent COP26 showcased the pressure or the power of people. People want to participate in the decision making. They want to pressure government to make the right decisions if they are not doing so, or the corporates to make the right decisions if they are not doing so. So that is a showcase of how people have exercised their rights towards a better environment or better planet. I'm sure that they are not only doing this for them, but also for the future. And when we talk about future, youth has taken an enormous effort as well as bold efforts to bring their ideas and pushing the government as well as corporates. So I'm sure that you guys will support them, or you're already doing it in your own way. Continue to do that. Try to grow it at scale so that it will attract more voices, more efforts, and strengthen your efforts further so that we can actually do it together towards a better planet. Before we wrap up and end these sessions, can Jo Leen and also Alison say a few words for the audience to appreciate better? Yeah, thanks.
All right, I'll go first. Thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in. Yeah, if you tuned for this session or even the previous session, thank you so much. And like what Alison mentioned just now, which hits really hard to me, is environmental education inspired action. Yeah, which I feel that is very important. You don't have to wait. You don't have to wait until the right timing to actually do environmental education. I'm sure there are many parents, many individuals are already, implementing environmental education in their daily life without realizing it. Yeah, just have to get out there and find connection, find networks that are able to, do more positive actions together to our earth. Thank you.
Perfect. Thanks, Jo Leen. And yeah, it echoes. We were just talking about another climate change review we're doing, and that basically we were sitting around saying, so many people who want to help, who want to make a difference, and that's always so inspiring. And then we thought, how do we get this message to them about how to make the difference? And so that's what's really important in environmental education. This focus on action, and that, yeah, it's great to be concerned, it's great to know a lot, but yeah, we've got to get out there and make the change. So it's always so inspiring to hear, Jo Leen, from folks on the ground and what they're doing. And you said your program is small, but it seems so big. So it was great to share that. So thank you for sharing that. And Thiaga, thank you. And thank you, Christy, for helping us moderate and everything.
Thank you very much for your time, as well as to participants who has tuned in for your time as well. Hope that you will make a difference. And until we see a goodbye for all of us here. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.